Hi, everyone. Welcome to the next edition of the Florida Springs Council Ask Me Anything series. I'm Florida Springs Council Executive Director Ryan Smart. Today, I am happy to once again be joined by Florida Springs Council board member and Springs guru, Bob Palmer. Hey, Bob.
Hey, Ryan. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Today's question is, it seems like Florida has good laws to protect waters on the books for decades, yet our springs get worse and worse. Why is there such a disconnect between our laws and enforcement?
Good question. Ryan, previously in previous lives, I'd been up in Washington, D.C. I was a staff director of a committee in the U.S. Congress. And so I have it was the science committee up there. So I have some understanding of science and how it interacts with policy and politics. I did that for close to 30 years before I moved down to Florida and got a chance to observe the Florida legislature. And what the legislatures do, they really have to do three things. They've got to pass a budget every year. They don't have to pass laws, but they do pass laws. And three, which I think is maybe the most important thing, is they have to do oversight. They have to follow these laws and make sure they're being implemented as they were intended to be implemented. And my experience down here, oversight was a mixed bag up in the U.S. Congress, but I find it's terrible in Florida. The Florida legislature does virtually no oversight of the laws it passes or the programs it creates. And so it's left to the press and the citizens to ensure that these laws are implemented. You have the environmental agencies, be it DEP or the water management districts, they come up, they say, everything's fine, we got everything under control, we love you guys. And our elected representatives sit there basically afraid to ask questions or challenge them. Now, maybe they do in the privacy of their offices, but you never see it in public. So as I said, it's kind of left to the press, which is weaker by the day, and citizens are strapped because they have to challenge via lawsuits. That's expensive and difficult to do. So what does the legislature do? When things get too problematic, like a year or two ago, we had red tide, we had blue-green algae, we had springs dying. Oh my God, we got to pass a law. So they run around, they write a law, they pass it. The initial bill is usually pretty good. As it goes through the process, it gets worse and worse. As you know, Ryan, I see the scars there on your face from this year. And they finally pass a bill that does nothing. And they all take a victory lap and high five each other. And that bill lasts for about 5 years until the next crisis. And then they come back, then they pass another law and they do a victory lap. And that's exactly what happened this year. Unfortunately, we can't rely on the legislature to track this year by year and ensure that the agencies and the companies and so forth are doing what the bill intended them to do. That's a depressing answer to a good question.
Thanks. So it sounds like what laws we do have aren't being enforced and the legislature isn't doing anything to do the oversight they should be. So I think in high school civics classes, most of us were taught in that situation, the legislature passes a bill and the executive refuses to follow it, that's where the courts would get involved and that the courts would force the executive to follow the law. However, in Florida, that doesn't seem to have been our situation. Can you talk about why that is?
Well, I've had some experience in the last 2 or 3 years with the Springs Council bringing and groups that are members of the Springs Council bringing legal action. We've generally ended up in front of administrative law judge, the DOA agency in the state of Florida, Department of Administrative Hearings. The problems there are the judges are very predisposed to accept agency science over other science. And although we had Bob Knight as our principal witness, who's Mr. Springs in Florida, Bob constructed an entire water model on his own, at his own expense, to argue that his model was better than the state's model. And in the end, the judge said, well, I don't know whose model's better, but I really have to kind of go with the state when I can't really decide. Part of the problem is these judges are political and they don't always have particularly good scientific credentials to really weigh in on these cases. It's how you asked the question of how these laws get implemented when the agencies refuse to do it. And And that's how it happens, is citizens finding the time, money, expertise to challenge. Fortunately, we have groups like the Springs Council and a bunch of our constituent groups that aren't afraid to follow through when the legislature doesn't do it. So we're grateful to all those groups, and we hope they keep their chins up and keep fighting.
So at this point, even though the courts aren't optimal, it's pretty much the best venue we have to try to challenge these rules and make our agencies do better.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the water quality issues, which are mediated through these basin management action plans. I think you're looking at going to court. There's really no other option there. The water quantity challenges, which are consumptive use permits or these MFLs I mentioned, minimum flows and levels for the various springs and rivers. Those are court challenges. Or, I've had a dream for 5 years that we need better water models, because when we get into court on these water quantity challenges, it all comes down to the fact that the water management districts produce these models, which they write and they're reviewed by their own peer reviewers. And I think, frankly, the water models that are employed by the state of Florida are really not very competent people in general. Some are, but I've talked to others around the country, and it's a very insular group here in Florida. They don't go to international or national meetings. They're not really at the head of the science, the forefront of the science. So my dream is that we would have a competition with different models, and we'd actually be able to challenge the district water models, because that's what governs water permits, like the Nestle permit that got so much attention recently, or the minimum flows and levels for all these rivers. The state agencies admit that the flows are down. When we challenged the Rainbow MFL unsuccessfully, the Southwest Florida Water Management District said, yeah, you're right, flows are down 20% in the Rainbow River. Has nothing to do with pumping. It's all because of rainfall patterns. Well, we argued pumping was very significant there. And the judge said, well, I can't decide on these models, I'll go with the district. If we had alternative competitive models to run up against the district's models, the judge might have reached a different conclusion. So lawsuits, yeah. Better models, yeah. I can't think of any other silver bullets, Ryan.
Well, one thing that's interesting is we're saying that, we need to help them write better laws, we being the citizens. We have to sue them to make the administration enforce better laws. And now we need to come up with the models as well, so that the permitting and the regulations they do are appropriate. It seems like in every instance, the government is failing, and nonprofits, individual people are being asked to step up if anything's going to be done to protect our waters. Is that pretty fair?
Yeah, we're outgunned. I just got a draft of a new book by Bob Knight, Mr. Springs, and Bob has a little section in there on lobbyists, and the number of lobbyists that represent the affected industries that would be affected by stronger controls on water use or pollution in our springs and rivers. The number of lobbyists that are employed by those industries is in the hundreds.
Yeah.
And the number of lobbyists that represent the environment, you can count on your fingers. So we're definitely outgunned. I don't think we're outsmarted, but we're outgunned, we're outspent. But fortunately, there's a few folks that are continuing to fight against
You're one of them.
Difficult odds.
Thanks a lot, Bob. Well, thanks a lot for joining us. Thanks everybody for watching. If you have any questions, go to the Florida Springs Council Facebook page. You can ask them there. While you're there, like our page, subscribe to our email alerts. Everyone stay safe and sane, and we'll see you again soon. Bye.